This is Don't Get Me Started. This is a conversation about advertising. And here is your host, freelance creative director and creative circus department head, Dan Balser.
Yes, welcome back to a new year, new decade, and a new episode of the ongoing conversations that I have with friends old and new, and this is an old friend. This is a catching up, so to speak, with a former student and buddy. Graduated like 9 years ago.
9 years ago.
Creative circus. Cam Paries, as you know. And, I hope, first of all, before I get into this conversation, I hope everybody had a really good holiday. This is unlike me. I usually have a bunch of these conversations in the can, ready to roll. This is being recorded and published pretty soon thereafter. Did you make any resolutions? I didn't meant to ask that.
I don't think so. I mean, I have some stuff, but like I want to buy a house.
So that's a big one.
Yeah, it's a big one.
Are you supposed to make like a really big one for a decade?
Oh, I don't know.
Like my resolution this decade is to own a home.
But yeah, I mean, that's one of them. Like get myself situated in Atlanta for...
Yeah, so you're back in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you, the reason I want to talk to Cam listeners is that he's had a really interesting route out of school. He went, graduated from Brigham Young. I didn't realize you went to BYU.
Yeah, in Idaho, of all places. So
what does that even mean?
There's 3 campuses.
This is for the non-Mormons?
Yeah. There's 3 campuses, one of BYU in Provo, and then there is one in Idaho and in Hawaii.
In Hawaii?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's you chose Idaho.
Well, right. It's hardest to get into Provo. I was not a good student, so...
Fair. That's fair. You know what? Maybe you're like me. Find yourself later in life, you know?
I agree.
I definitely was in high school. Graduated from the circus in around 2011. And then this is interesting because I did not know, I couldn't remember where you started. And but the Arnold internship was before school, right?
Was before school.
Is that how you found out about ad school?
It was, yep. I had a book from my undergrad, and I showed it to my ACD at the time, and he's like, "You are not ready." So,
and another thing I never realized was that this looks like while you were in school, you worked as an intern for the Grizzlies. That's a basketball team, folks.
No, that's the ECHL hockey team in Salt Lake.
Oh,
yeah.
The Utah Grizzlies is an ECHL hockey team in Salt Lake.
Yeah,
that's a minor league hockey team. What'd you do?
I was game day, so I helped with the color commentator. Like I helped him with stats and like got him ready for stuff like that. And then I was the mascot and community appearances and stuff like that.
Did you just go like this, or you had to wear something?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then stuff like that.
You had to wear like a costume?
Oh yeah, I was the bear.
Yeah.
And then I did some graphic design stuff for them as well. So it was just kind of...
I'm just curious about this. Did you, at that point, you're a young guy, were you like looking to get into something graphic, or were you trying to think about going into sports as a career? Like when did it sort of form that you were inclined to be a visual communicator?
It was actually senior year of high school when I was in an English class, and we had to do a project on, it was one of like it was either the Odyssey or something like that. And they were like, oh, you can do something cool to represent the book or whatever. And I designed a movie poster for it.
Oh, that's very cool.
And so, and I even like asked my dad, who knew a photographer, and this was before like you could print big easily. I was like, can I get like a 20 by 30? And like I brought it to school. And it was like,
you were art director solving problems then.
Yeah,
that's kind of cool.
So that just kind of worked out that way. And then I was like, I think I want to get into the marketing part. And then it just, as I kept on going through school, it just became more and more specific.
That's cool. Then on to Donor right after graduation for a little over 3.5 years.
Yep.
And that was in Detroit.
Yep.
Working on Serta, Minute Maid, JBL, Harman. What's Harman?
Harman is the parent company of like JBL and Mark
Harman
Levinson.
Kardon?
Yeah,
Okay.
Harman Kardon. All of those are in like together.
Fiat, UPS Store, and Perkins. What was the favorite thing you did at Donor?
My Fiat spot.
Yeah, the Fiat Super Bowl commercial.
I don't know if it was Super Bowl. I don't think
it was.
It didn't.
It was for the point of this podcast.
Oh, right.
It didn't make the Super Bowl?
It was. I think they released it right after it because they didn't want to spend the money.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it's an epic desert commercial, and
Yeah.
it's still, I think it's still on the school's reel.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
fun.
Yeah.
So that was all shot on location?
Yeah, that was an interesting story because the idea didn't have Diddy in it at all.
All right, so let me explain to the listeners. I'm going to try to summarize the commercial.
Sure.
Two guys stuck in the desert. They see a Fiat go by. One guy doesn't believe it because it's a mirage. It can't possibly be true. The other guy's, oh my God, that was a Fiat. They get to this massive party with P. Diddy. This guy's like, oh my God, finally we found this oasis. He's like, no, it's a mirage, man. Look, Fiat has 4 doors. Fiats are small cars. They can't have 4 doors.
Right.
This has to be pretend. This isn't real. And then they run into P. Diddy. And then they don't believe it, walk back in the desert. And P. Diddy says, oh, you're definitely going to die now.
Yeah. It was so funny because I still think about that because, in the edit, there were so many fun jokes there. And then, picking that one. I mean, I think that was in the top 2 or 3.
Okay, so here's my gripe with that spot. Can I say it now?
Yep, absolutely.
Here's my gripe with it. These guys are walking through the desert, and one guy, they're dying of thirst and starvation. The guy goes, we're going to die, we're going to die. And then later on, at the very end, they decide to walk back out in the desert, and P. Diddy goes, oh, you definitely going to die now.
Mm-hmm.
But Puff Daddy would not have heard them say, we're going to die. He would never, he was reacting to something only the audience had heard.
Right. The we're gonna die
Mm-hmm.
was ADR at the end. They I remember
Interesting.
I remember at the end we're like, wait, where did those 2 words come from? All right, well,
Interesting.
There you go.
So they add, who's the they?
No, I think the creative directors at the time did it. But
anyway,
funny.
really fun commercial, really great way to do that. So then on to R&R Partners in Las Vegas, and God, how. This is the thing about Cam. This is the reason why I want to talk to you, because I think that, with all due respect to Rob Strasberg, Donor, all due respect to the great work that's come out of Donor and R&R in Las Vegas, Detroit and Las Vegas are not the cities that always roll off of someone's tongue when they're looking for jobs entering 7th, 8th quarter. These aren't the cities that people say, I'm going to go to. And I will, every quarter, I end up saying, you guys, your career is a lot longer than you think it's going to be.
It really is.
Your career is built. It's built from the ground. And if you look at your portfolio, especially your TV reel, the stuff you did at R&R is fucking world-class work. It's
thanks.
Breathtaking, beautiful. I mean, the stuff for Las Vegas, and I can't believe you managed to somehow work your way into doing Las Vegas with hockey. And I want to talk about that in a second. So let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to do the resume. I'm going to circle back to that. And now you've been, since very recently, an associate creative director in ACD here in Atlanta at 22squared. Definitely top tier Atlanta agency. And first of all, congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Way to go on everything so far. I'm not surprised to see how well you're doing, but I'm super thrilled to see it. And welcome back to school.
Thank you.
So I do want to talk about when you got to R&R. Did they have a hockey team?
It was kind of in the works. It was really close. They had done the whole thing like they did in Seattle, where they sold out season tickets and did that whole thing. Yeah. But it didn't get announced until 3 months after I moved there.
Right. And the reason I'm saying this, listeners, is you don't know that Cam's a huge hockey fan.
Yeah.
And he's wearing a Calgary. You'll see this on the. Oh, by the way, I meant to say this at the top of the show. This show now has an Instagram. Finally, it's at DGMS Podcast. But this is another thing that I try to talk a lot about with students is finding the thing that you're into. It just becomes a natural progression for you to do good work for it. So, talk a little bit about what it was like when they end up getting that work and you end up working on Vegas and a little bit of the. I don't know if you had did you work on the nights? You didn't have the nights.
No, I worked with one of the players.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you haven't seen that stuff. It's not on my website yet.
Okay.
But we worked on that stuff. But I worked with the NHL specifically.
Okay.
So the league.
Yeah. There were 2 commercials on your reel that I thought were the ones I was saying were so great. One was talking about how it's the moment when you first see it. I love the writing on the spot about how you kind of equated the hockey and the Golden Knights experience with the Las Vegas experience. And it was an NHL Las Vegas partnership spot.
Right.
Beautifully done.
Yeah.
And the other one was just a fucking gorgeous, breathtakingly written. Who's the writer on this Stanley Cup commercial? It was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, that's my partner in Vegas, Aaron. Him and the creative director kind of teamed it, but it was that's the spot that I'm I hope I can do better, because it's my favorite thing and it'll always be there.
I wish I had written down a line of copy about how it's it's burnished by the hands of heroes or something like that.
Right.
Like it's worn down. The cup is, and it's this beautiful shot close-ups of a revolving Stanley Cup, and it's breathtaking. And the only sport I can think of that has a physical icon that represents everything about it, like the Stanley Cup does.
Right. And it's funny because like in school and all these things, you like have an idea in mind and then it doesn't come to fruition because you don't have like the skill or whatever, or budgets come in the way. That spot was not that way. Yeah. Everything that we wanted kind of worked out.
Right.
And so that's kind of, it was, it'll always be on my reel. It's my favorite thing.
It's perfectly timeless as well. I mean, it's not going to be ever feel dated. So talk about that a little bit. I actually written down the word production. Talk about what it's like. One of the questions that I was going to ask you that we can segue into production or something else is like, if you can somehow remember what it was like to be here and going off to your first job,
right?
Was there anything about, you just mentioned something that's great about having a job is that you have budgets and you can actually work with talented people who've done those things before. But what were some of the things that surprised you or things you didn't expect at your first job? Talk about your years at Donor. Was there anything that's sort of like, wow, this is either harder than I thought it was going to be, easier than I thought it was going to be? Anything that surprised you?
I think, to be honest, when I first got there, I think the Creative Circus is one of those places that you get out of it what you put into it.
Very much.
And I pushed here, and as soon as I got there the first couple of weeks, I was like, this isn't that bad.
Right.
Because we were just working and going and going.
It sort of felt like the same?
Yeah, I think the amount of stuff that you get killed right away, that was eye-opening.
Yeah, because it's not maybe killed.
No, it's
not like
dead.
Yeah,
it's like, you go from in school, like half of your stuff is, that's okay, keep on working on that, to right in school, you're like, oh, I presented 20 ideas and half of an idea survived. Keep working on that. Yeah. So I think that was a big thing.
That's a big one. What's your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job? Well, it's changed kind of recently, actually.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because, at first it was all the stuff that I felt like I was getting better at. Like, it's like, oh, I'm coming up with the ideas. That's my favorite part. But then we would go on to these productions and then I'd get to learn from directors and stuff. And then that was my favorite part.
What have you learned from directors?
I think a lot of like the story arcs and stuff like that, and making sure that things connected and making sure that the story made sense from beginning to end, and then that it actually had like beginning, middle, end, and stuff like that. Because sometimes we're like, oh, that's funny, and it's like joke,
right?
Instead of like actually telling a story and like making sure that it ends up with something.
Well, I'm embarrassed to say I don't specifically remember anything specific from your student book. Don't remember it specifically. When I look at the work you've done now, it's gorgeous. Do you feel yourself being pulled away from type and print and 2D flat stuff? Even the stuff that's in your book that's more social is more experiential.
Right.
It's more content. It's less traditional art direction and design. Do you find that that was a strength that you've lost? Is that something that you feel like you don't miss at all? Like, talk a little bit about your own personal craft development.
Yeah, well, when I was starting to get a little antsy in Detroit, I was starting to look, and I was like looking at like designer roles and some other stuff. And what ended up kind of shaking out is like the conceptual part was the strongest part of my my skill set.
Storytelling.
Yeah, the storytelling part. And so instead of being like, I'm going to get a senior designer role at a tech company, like,
do you know why I said storytelling? Why I clarified that? Because I think that we have to be, I feel like I want to be careful on the podcast with words like conceptual and design, because I think that design has concepts. It just means something different.
Right. You're absolutely right.
So I don't want to say that a designer isn't conceptual. A designer doesn't tell the same types of stories. Designers tell brand stories. We tell sort of more stories about a promise and more
narrative
more
stories.
narratives. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So do you miss being a designer? Do you still do some design work?
Yeah, I think I have to do stuff like that every day, and come up with. I like the beginning part of the design more now than like the finicky like pixel perfect stuff. Like I
Do
love.
you hire people for that? Do you
It
guys have
depends.
it? Does 22 have a design department?
Not really.
So you
Well,
got-
and especially my department. Especially.
What are you working on?
I work on Buffalo Wild Wings now,
Okay, right.
and it's completely social, and it's
Hmm.
basically my partner and I.
Oh my God.
And so
Is that awesome or is it crazy? Or both?
a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And what I was saying, like why it's changed is because like, I really loved the production part of things for a long time. And like, because in the edit is where a story is told.
100%.
Like you can come up with the idea and the script and everything, but in the edit is where the jokes happen, the timing happens, all of that stuff is there. And so when I started doing content stuff, I started to become more in control of that because I wasn't, I was working with great editors for sure. But then I was like, man, I want to try this.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's kind of where it is now. Like I'm in Final Cut a lot. Like we're doing that.
You guys capturing live action or is this, what's the content?
It depends. We do a lot of live action. I shoot a lot of stuff on my phone.
Wow, that's crazy.
And we're doing that. We work with some animators that we have that we do stuff like that too. I'm probably gonna go up and shoot some stuff myself, still photography for the.
I'm taking a picture right now of the Buffalo Wild Wings production studio. There you go. I took a picture of I took a picture of Cam's phone.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put on Instagram as like the Buffalo Wild Wings social production department.
It's true. But I mean the cameras now are just awesome.
Unreal.
Like it's just, and so we're able to do that. We're able to just be like, okay, we need to go and grab this really quick.
Right. The reason I was asking whether you get live stuff is like one of the lessons that I learned in television production was that once you get into that editing suite, whatever you got is all you have.
Oh, that's true as well. Yeah.
So some of the best television stories that I've had on this podcast are people who will go to this shoot and have a whole bunch of extra wild stuff just to get
Right.
to have stuff when you get back. And one of the things I think is really important is when you're shooting, when you're on production, to always have your creative brain tethered back to the core idea of the story and try different things. But have you ever found yourself editing where you're like, God, this is all we have. I wish we had more. Or do you ever find yourself like editing it into a completely different story? Or
That, yes. The second one for sure. But I think I've never gotten to the point where we're like, we don't have it.
right.
Because before that even comes, I'm already moving my head to be like, oh, how can we make this work? How can we make this work? And a lot of times, because budgets are shrinking and there's, you just don't have the same amount of money anymore. And so you're using stock and you're using other things. And so you're trying to come up with something creative with those kind of assets now, instead of like, oh, we get to hire 10 SAG actors and do that just doesn't happen as much anymore.
That's kind of fun though, right?
Oh yeah. Like I think that's one of the things that I tell people when they do ask me questions. It's like, I know, like coming out of school, you want to work on the coolest accounts and you want to work at the coolest places and stuff like that. But I believe there's opportunity in everything.
Probably a lot more opportunity because those cool brands are already doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
That you have an opportunity to move something, to change something, to shift something. It doesn't seem like that's a better opportunity because why hasn't it been done? But it is clearly a better opportunity.
Right.
So far, what has frustrated you? I'm not talking about 22, just generally. And as a professional art director, what so far in the career, what your job has been sort of a frustrating part of it?
I think the differences in process.
Oh, interesting.
Because every place you go, and even every like PM you work with, and every account person you work, they have their own processes that they want, and I'm the type of guy that I just want to get it done, and that's why I wasn't super good at like actual school, is because you have to check these boxes to get an A, which is fine, whatever. But I would look at the first line, and then I would be like, what is the end goal? And I would usually go like all over the place to find And then I would get something that I was really proud of, and then I'd get my grade back, and I'd be like, "Oh, this is a C+ because I missed this part, this part, this part, and this part." But the end product was great, you know. And so when I came here, that changed because I didn't have to worry about that. As long
you're
as
saying in undergrad, it was
undergrad, not here, not necessarily, not at the circus, but like at a traditional school.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. I thought you were talking about the circus. I'm like, what? I don't remember giving you C's.
No.
I remember getting C's.
Yeah, it was just being able to have to like follow somebody else's.
Wait a minute. When you say process, you're talking about production process or like approval hierarchy or what?
All of that.
Client relationships and how what's prepared to go to the client is probably different places too.
Yep.
Do you have like proprietary deck that things have to be laid into? To
Sometimes, and it's all of that kind of stuff. And so I tend to fight back on that, and so sometimes that can get a little dicey.
So give an example of a time when they felt something and you felt it was gratuitous. I mean, because there is something to be said for consistency from your brand, from the agency's brand.
So one of the things that I really like pushed on once, it was at R&R was like, we just need to do sketches for these people. We need to make sure that they understand the idea before we go in, because they wanted to do like full blown comps and at Donor and some other places, I learned like they get so into the weeds about little things. The wrong stock photo you picked just for a comp that's never going to go show. Like,
why wouldn't they?
Right.
That's what you're asking them to comment on, and it's a terrible way to represent work.
Right. And so
I'm going to be on your camp and your camp on this one.
So I was like, let's pare it back as much as we can so that they can really concentrate on what we're trying to say and what we're trying to represent instead of like
how it's going to be
done, because that's next. That's next in the process.
Exactly right. That's fair. So I do remember you as a student, and I do remember that what you just said is very accurate, that you like to just get it done. You're definitely an industrious, hardworking guy. It means a lot. What personal trait of yours, what is it about you do you think has served you well so far in your career?
I think the biggest thing for me is like building those relationships within the creative department and out. I don't ever want to be that guy that the account person that hates to come to talk to, because they need to become your allies, not your enemies.
Really great.
And so like, you know, and that hasn't always been the case, but making sure that we're on the same team, because we're on the same team trying to sell this work to this client.
That's great.
And then even the client, like making sure that you understand what they really want.
When did you learn this? Before you started or after?
After. Yeah. You thought, you know, you come out like, I'm the creative, I need to push.
Yeah.
You know,
I learned later in my career that like, I guess I should have been empathetic, but I think that I learned that account guys, this was especially at Ogilvy and Mather, New York, that they were scared to come down to our floor. They were scared to interact with us. And it's like, then they would have to put together some sort of protection for themselves, and it just became there's an unnecessary animosity because we didn't feel like we were on the same team, but in fact we were. That wasn't always the case, not with every account person that I worked with, but that shouldn't be. That's a great one.
Yeah, and I think that the best work in my book is the stuff that, well, my book, I didn't put the stuff in there that you know, we struggled as a team.
What's the best stuff?
My best stuff by far is Stanley Cup. Like there's no, and it's the spot is great.
Where does that brief come from?
I don't remember.
Where does what's the brief on the Stanley Cup spot?
So it was Stanley Cup is 125 years old.
Okay, that's it. The brief wanted to celebrate 125 years.
Yep.
That was the brief.
Yep. And they wanted one spot, and we ended up doing 2 spots and an experience.
Yeah, I saw the experience. It's really cool.
I
can't believe that experience.
That experience is one of like, it still gives me goosebumps.
This was unbelievable to me because people were literally crying in the presence of the Stanley Cup.
The story is better than the video.
So tell what this experience was, because we're talking like everybody's seen it.
Right. So the experience was, we had this box outside of the arena in Pittsburgh saying that there was a virtual reality experience with the Stanley Cup. And Pittsburgh had just won it, so they were like, oh, cool. And so they had people line up to experience this virtual reality experience with the Stanley Cup. While they were watching this thing that we created in virtual reality, we had the actual cup hidden and brought out, so when they took off their glasses, they saw it in real life.
Yeah, right there in front of them. Physically, literally, right in front
Yeah,
of them.
right there in front of them. And so, and growing up, like, that would have been an absolute dream for me. You know, like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. And just, I was able to spend like a week with it. We talked to Phil, and he knew where
He's
every...
the keeper of the cup.
Yeah.
Phil. The white-haired guy you always see with the white gloves.
Yeah, exactly. And like every ding and mark, he knew where it was, and he had stories about all of that stuff. And
so cool.
but the one where you saw these people crying, they were talking about how like they were all coming to this specific game because they had just lost a son and the last game they went to was the parade for the Stanley Cup.
Oh God.
And they were coming to this as like an homage to him.
Oh God.
And so we're like, we're all sitting there, and I'm kind of hiding behind a curtain. And then like as soon as they start taking, and I'm watching the monitor, and as soon as they take off the glasses, they're just, the whole family is just like,
Oh man.
Waterworks everywhere. And so then they tell us this story about like this is the family coming together to celebrate the life of their son and this whole thing.
God.
And we're like, and we're all just dying down behind there, and we had to like take a break because it was emotional, but it was so awesome.
Isn't it crazy that you can step into people's lives like that? I mean, the advertising can put you into people's lives like that. It's unreal.
Right.
Unreal. God, it's crazy. All right, so knowing what you know now, if you could go back in time to the day you walked out of the creative circus after graduation, big class, great class, really good class.
It was fun.
What would you whisper in young Cam's ear?
You're better than you think you are.
And how do you define better in that context?
I just think that I had like the biggest case of imposter syndrome on the planet.
Wow.
Where I just didn't think I was creative enough. I didn't think that I was like, because I wasn't the illustrator in the class, and I wasn't the guy that was doing all these crazy things, and you know, I wasn't that guy. And so, because like you said, our class, there was a lot, like there was talent all over the place.
Yeah, I'd say that I really do believe it probably had the most talent of that class is probably the top 3 or 4 classes I've ever seen in 60 or 70 since I've been here. I'm not kidding.
So like when I left, and then, you know, like we had people going to New York and all sorts of people went to Apple, you know, like all these places. And so I was like, oh, can I even do this? And then, you know, it took a while to like figure out that I can actually do this.
You know what I find interesting? The word better. Because I feel like the currency in this building is not necessarily exactly aligned with the currency in the real world. Meaning here, there's a huge value on originality and creativity. I'm not saying you're not creative,
right?
But you have strengths that not everybody necessarily has that translate to the real world possibly better than creativity. So yeah, it probably would have helped you to hear yourself say that. But I also think that I'm glad to see that you cut yourself some slack.
Yeah,
and leaned into your strengths.
And that was the other thing too. And I remember, you know, right before I left Donor, the ACD like told me, he's like, yeah, you know, like we hired you, and this was as a junior. He was like, we hired you for your opinion. Like, you know, if you have something to say, like we hired you for that, so do that. And I think that was another like one of those moments where I said, oh,
well, you got to go to the right place that gives you the license to be you too. That's really great. Well, great for Donor. That's great. Well, thank you so much for talking.
No, it was great. It was fun.
That's awesome. Listeners, you can reach Cam at cameron.paries@gmail.com. The website has some stuff that's protected, but it's cameronparies.com, and you can see that stuff on there. It's great. I'm not going to spell his name because you can look at the name of the show's got it in there.
Yeah. And you can go to my LinkedIn for the password if you want.
Oh, tricky. Cameron Paries on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is important, folks. You should be on LinkedIn. Connect with me. It's Dan Balser. It's my name. Also, you can reach me at danspodcast@mac.com. And the Instagram is DGMS Podcast. The show is also on Spotify. You're already listening to it, but if it's easier for you to listen to it on Spotify, go for it. It's also on Facebook, DGMS Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Cam, thanks again, man.
It was awesome.
So great to see you.
Yep.
Listeners, see you soon. Bye.
Bye.